So we're very fortunate to have Dave Maxwell. He's going to tell you his story, but I just want to let you know he's one of the most respected think tank experts on the Korea, on all Korea matters. But what I really appreciate about him is that he spends a significant amount of his time mentoring and helping younger people who are interested in the alliance and Korea. So this guy really is amazing. So looking forward to hearing your story, sir. Thank you very much, Dave Maxwell.
Well, thank you, Steve, for the kind words, but I have to say that putting me after these two wonderful daughters and their very powerful testimony, I will hold that against you forever. We heard before, I don't want to follow a general, right? Rick said that. Well, following these two ladies who have really given so much from the heart, it's an honor to follow you speaking, but it really is, your testimony, your stories were heartfelt and really appreciated. So thank you for what you've told us. And I just don't have anything that will compare to that. So like many of us, we've heard stories. I got to Korea via Germany. I was in Germany. I got promoted to captain, and I was stuck there. All my friends started going back to the infantry officer advanced course, and I called up the branch. I said, hey, when am I going to school? And there was a pause, and they'd forgotten about me and left me out. And so they said, oh, you're going to go next month, so get ready. And I said, well, where are you going to send me after that? And I'd been in the 3rd Infantry Division in Germany, 1st of the 30th Infantry, and they said, we're going to send you to Fort Jackson. You're going to go to a basic training company. And I said, I didn't want to do that. I want to go to the 82nd or the 101st. And they said, no, you have enough time with troops. You're going to go train troops. And I said, well, what about Korea? And they said, you want to go to Korea? I said, yes, I'll go to Korea. And so when they cut my RFO, everybody in the military, the request for orders that generates your orders, in the remarks block was specific instructions that this officer accepts follow-on assignment to Korea. They were so happy to have a captain who volunteered to go to Korea that they actually put that in my orders. So that's how I got to Korea. June of 1986, I got off the plane at Osan, went straight to Tongducheon, drew all my equipment, and then they sent me to Camp Howes, which was the brigade headquarters, because I was on my way to 1st of the 506, like Kevin. I didn't go to Camp Greaves right away. I didn't get there for another 2 weeks because the 506 was in the field. And so I spent the first 2 weeks in Korea living out of a rucksack with the 1st of the 506. And at the end of the RTEP, the end of the exercise, we went back to Camp Greaves, and that's when I found out where I was living and would be working. So that was my introduction to Korea, the welcome. And it was a great welcome because, as Kevin has said, Camp Greaves was a wonderful place. The 506, actually at the time, was the 1st of the 9th Infantry in 1986. And we transitioned in 1987 to the 1st of the 506. But it was a great place, great soldiers. Being able to patrol the DMZ, and my recommendation, if any of the senior leaders are here, and we have some, I recommend that U.S. forces return to patrolling the DMZ. And I can give chapter and verse on why that's important, both for training of U.S. soldiers, but also interoperability, South Korea and U.S. soldiers. I would do it differently now, not have an American sector. I would integrate with all the ROK battalions, giving a break to the ROK battalions from patrolling. And I think strategically it would send a powerful message to have U.S. forces operating side by side with Korean forces on the DMZ. But of course, there's lots of political problems to that. Relationships, the general mentioned relationships, and I think every single person who's come before me, and I know everyone after me, will talk about relationships. And they were, the relationships that have been built have been established. General Jung was one of my bosses when he was a colonel, and I was a young major, and chief of GCC plans at CFC, and so we've known each other for a long time. And At the time, General Sharp was Colonel Sharp. It was the XO to General Tillelly. And working for General Tillelly was a great experience as well. I'm sure people know Lieutenant General retired Chun In Boom. He and I were Special Forces captains together at the Special Warfare Command in 1989. And then later at the Special Warfare Command as colonels, he was the Chief of Staff and I was his Deputy Chief of Staff. And so we developed these relationships. But for me, they started at Camp Greaves in Korea. And when I got to be a company commander and having Katusas, I had 160 soldiers in Combat Support Company. 30 of them were Katusa soldiers. And of course, I didn't get to go to DLI. I had to struggle to learn, but like I learned from osmosis, but my, 한국말 조금합니다. 죄송합니다. My accent, though, was, was, I guess, unusual because my senior Katusa, Sergeant Kim, said to me, "Sir, can I speak freely?" One night, we're in the middle of the night driving around through the checkpoints during curfew, and and he said, "Can I speak freely?" I said, "Of course you can." He said, "You speak Korean like a woman," and so I became very self-conscious after that. But I think I have a pretty good ear, and I can mimic. And of course, we often learn. And many of the Korean language instructors are women, and of course, I learned really from my wife, who I was fortunate enough to marry, and we're going to celebrate our 35th wedding anniversary in September. So, and we were also fortunate that our daughter was born in Seoul in 121 Hospital in 2000. So, we have a real family connection to Korea. But on the DMZ, and I think asking about the DMZ, and I didn't get involved in any firefights while I was on the DMZ, but we did conduct a lot of patrolling. I'll never forget Christmas Day in 1987, daylight patrol. We were on a rice paddy dike. It was, snow. We were laying there, and a mine blew up on the North Korean side along the fence. They would, and the North Koreans came out and investigated. But if you've been there, well, not anymore, but back then, South Korea and North Korea played propaganda music all the time, and we would hear this music. And one of the things the soldiers liked to do was to go to the Korean propaganda operators, and they would give them cassette tapes to play some music. And so we were there on Christmas Day, looking at the North Koreans. They're scurrying around dealing with this exploded mine. And on the loudspeakers come the Beach Boys. I wish they could be all California girls, and I'll never forget that. But one time when my driver, Specialist Birch, it was time to re-enlist. As everybody knows, you get to re-enlist in a ceremony of your choice. And so he wanted to hike up to the DMZ. I think it was Hill 202. It was just overlooking in the 1st Rock Division area, just overlooking the South Barrier fence. And he wanted to hike up there at midnight and re-enlist under the moonlight. And he wanted the battalion commander, the battalion command sergeant major, myself, the first sergeant, and of course the re-enlistment NCO. And so we drove up there, we got out of our Jeeps, and we climbed up the hill. And the re-enlistment NCO unfurled the flag, and the battalion commander re-enlisted Specialist Birch in the moonlight there. And while they just completed the oath, on the loudspeakers, from the southern side, starts blaring the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And to this day, everyone swears that they did not coordinate that it was just, it just happened. And it's, one of those things that you remember that have, really special meaning. And of course, Specialist Birch wanted to re-enlist on the DMZ. He felt that close to it. And just things happen that you always remember and take to heart. So, after I left Camp Greaves in the 506th, I went to Special Forces training, and the battalion I was assigned to in first group was responsible for Korea. So I spent from 89 to 94 in every exercise in Korea: full eagle, multi-focus lens, team spirit, did the last team spirit, plus training with the Korean Special Forces. So even though I wasn't assigned to Korea, I was there for 6 months of the year until I got promoted to major and they sent me off to school. And one thing about school that I will tell you is that I went to the School of Advanced Military Studies, and I wrote my second monograph about the catastrophic collapse of North Korea. Of course, we'd gone through the arduous march, and we had the agreed framework in 1994, the nuclear agreement, but many people thought North Korea was going to collapse, and so I decided to study it, and I wrote that monograph, and then the Army sent me back to Korea, and I got to work in C3 plans, and at the time, we were tasked to plan for the possibility of instability and collapse, and that provided me with a great opportunity to work with my good friend and mentor, Robert Collins, who I think many people know. But what it really did was we formed this, what we called super combined working group. I mean, it was so important that the ROK-JCS sent planners, and then the ROK-U.S. CFC planners, and we developed this plan for instability and collapse, which of course has always been quite provocative and politically sensitive, but we really looked hard at the problem, and of course, we never predicted if or when North Korea would collapse, if there would be instability, but we always said that if it happens, it will be catastrophic, and we need to be prepared for it. And what it really makes it difficult is that the conditions that could lead to collapse could lead to war, and so these two phenomena are interconnected. And so that experience working for General Tillelli, General Ayers, who at the time was the General Safji's predecessor, really gave us a lot of opportunity to learn about North Korea and, of course, strategy and the like. The last time I was at Camp Humphreys was 2006, and I entered Camp Humphreys by parachute at night on the runway. I was the commander of the ROK 5th Special Forces Brigade, was training their brigade to do airfield seizure, like our Rangers. And so he asked me to go along with him and make that parachute jump. And so that was my last time I'd been at Camp Humphreys, seeing it at the night. Previous to that, of course, Camp Humphreys was a aviation brigade, some MI, a very small place, and it was, and of course, over the years had not grown like it has grown to now. But I finally went back in 2019 and I saw what it was, and what an amazing change to Camp Humphreys. And it was, it's really quite amazing. And Korea has given American forces a gift like no other. We all know it's the largest U.S. military base outside of the United States, and it is also, I think, from what I've seen, certainly the best military base overseas, anywhere that the U.S. is fortunate to live. And we're grateful to our Korean allies for really providing that. For those that don't know, I think the base cost about $8.7 billion. 97 or 93% of it was funded by the Korean government. So all those things you hear about burden sharing, our Korean allies share the burden, more than share it, and so we're grateful for that. Korea has stuck with me. I went back as the SOC Corps Chief of Staff, and my last assignment there ended in 2006. But I've continued to be engaged with Korea. I mean, it's and I think like everybody here, it's really in your blood, in your DNA. I mean, there is something about Korea for me that makes it my second home. But it really comes down to relationships, and you look out and you see everybody here. Why is everybody here? Because they believe in the alliance, they believe in the mission, and our relationships. We know each other. Whether we know each other or not, we have a common bond, a common connection. And that really, I think, it means a lot to me. I think, and so since I retired in 2011, I've kept close to Korea, and at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, I get to work on Northeast Asia issues, primarily Korea issues. And at the Global Peace Foundation, they've asked me to help work on civil society support to a free and unified Korea, and that's something that's I'm really passionate about, because I think that the solution to the nuclear program, the solution to the human rights abuses in the North, and the honor that we can pay to the fallen soldiers, Korean and U.S. and United Nations, the honor that we can pay is to really answer the Korea question. That's in paragraph 60 of the Armistice Agreement. And that Korea question, paragraph 60 says that within 90 days of the signing of the armistice, we're supposed to come together, political leaders are supposed to come together to solve the Korea question. And the Korea question is the unnatural division of the Korean Peninsula. And until there is a free and unified Korea, a united Republic of Korea, U-R-O-K or U-ROK, we won't see an end to the tragedy that is happening in the North and the threats that emanate from the mafia-like crime family cult of the Kim family regime. So, my experience with Korea is one of great love, joy, but also hardship. I can remember the cold. I've never been so cold as I was on the DMZ, but I've never been where there's such camaraderie. And I think that Korea to this day is one of the last places in the U.S. military that has such camaraderie because of the nature of the mission, the location, but also, most importantly, because of the people serving together. So I can't follow, again, what our two daughters have told us, but and I just do want to close with what you have told us is it makes everything I've ever experienced beautiful and heartwarming, and and to know the sacrifice of your father, I thank you and I thank him. So thank you.
Okay, sir, thank you very much. Okay, so not only does he have a personal connection to Korea, but he is, again, one of the preeminent experts on Korea. So ask away. Floor is open for anything about his personal story or anything you want to talk about Korea.
I usually start my lectures, there are no experts on Korea.
Yeah,
we are only students. We are students trying to understand what's happening in North Korea. So
that is a true expert. Yes, Kevin.
Thank you, sir, for your presentation, too, and another Curry. We need more of us up here. I really liked your comment on your thoughts and recommendations for going back to joint patrolling of not only the American sector of the DMZ, but the DMZ or whatever sectors we'd identify on there. And I found that fascinating because I always thought during the Cold War period, that was some of the best experience for young leaders in the United States military to spend time within the DMZ, just the basics of preparing for a patrol, briefing in and outside a Boniface Gate at the S2 forward shop, things like that was really good as far as training some of the leaders. I wish we could come up with a form, and if we could, what would be the steps that you would recommend, as brief as you could be in this, of how we could try to reintroduce that on the peninsula and with USFK?
Well, it'll take, of course, South Korean and U.S. leadership, wanting to do it. I think it's very possible to be done if there's the will to do it. I think there has to be the political analysis. I've given you my read. I think would send a powerful message of the alliance toward the North, but it will be politically sensitive. I also think practically, I think that it enhances interoperability by working side by side with Korean and U.S. forces, U.S. forces under the command of those divisions, brigades, and battalions that are manning the DMZ. Plus, it may also be able to spare some of the Korean units from the continuous patrolling and allow them to come south and do training, especially after the comprehensive military agreement that has restricted live fire training along the DMZ. So this could be a way to rotate forces, U.S. and South Korean, so that the South Korean forces can come off the DMZ to train, maintain their readiness. As you know, always conducting operations is not the same as training, and you've got to train to be able to conduct operations. So, and the more operations you conduct, the more your training readiness declines, and so you've got to be able to do that. So those are some of the things, but it will take political will. And if there's the political will, the military leaders of South Korea and the United States can make it happen. And I think it would be certainly to the military's benefit. The political calculations have to be weighed.
Dave, right
Steve?
over here.
I'm Aves Thompson, 3rd, the 23rd, 1965, 1966. That was a long time ago. Yes. As you're talking about the patrolling of the DMZ area, what are your thoughts on the combined division with the 2ID and the ROK Army? How's that working for you?
Well, that's happened after I've retired, and I wasn't part of that, but the combined U.S. 2nd Infantry Division, of course, we used to have the combined field army at Uijeonbu. ROK-U.S. I Corps used to be there. We disbanded that at the end of the 1980s. But I think that I think it's a good concept. I think that the missions that the division has to conduct are best suited to be combined. I think that it enhances relationships, number one, but also interoperability. And like anything else in combined operations, the beauty of combined operations is that we can maximize our strengths while mitigating the weaknesses that we have. You know, the U.S. and ROK forces are not identical. You know, they're not identical capabilities. They have strengths and weaknesses. But there is more strength being together than operating independently. So I'm a strong supporter of the combined division, and I would like to see that grow. I mean, it's really, you think about it as a stepping stone from the lower level up to the Combined Forces Command. You know, and the best decision we've made in this entire OPCON transition process is to keep the Combined Forces Command intact because it is combined operations, I think, that are going to bring success. As hard as they are, you know, as difficult as they are, I think you've got to, you know, training at all echelons and working together just really makes us stronger. So I'm a supporter of it.
Okay, sir, thank you very much. Really
Thanks,
appreciate it. Thank you. So our next speaker is David Beam. So he was selected for the first Korea Revisit program. Because his story is actually very unique in that experiences weren't always all positive about Korea, but there was something very significant that happened after he went and revisited Korea after many decades. So, David Beam, thank you for sharing your story with us. Please, sir.
Yes, I do have pictures. You just gotta hit that to go forward. What about going backwards? That's right there. Because I think it may have gotten reversed. All my pictures may have been reversed. So, no, they're in order. Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and especially all veterans who have served in the Republic of Korea. I am especially grateful to the KDVA for providing me this opportunity to speak here today and to the Republic of Korea, Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs, and our partner, the Korea-U.S. Alliance Foundation, for supporting the KDVA. The ROK-U.S. Alliance is a shining example of the benefits of cooperation and working together toward a common goal. My name is David Beam, and I served with the 3rd Brigade Headquarters of the 2nd Infantry Division from October 1966 through December 1967. This unit was a frontline brigade stationed north of the Imjin River along the Korean DMZ and was responsible for patrolling 18.5 miles of the 151-mile DMZ. I arrived in Korea on October 16, 1966. During the initial processing taking place in Seoul, I was informed that I was assigned to the 2nd Division. Along with this information, the provider of said information expressed his heartfelt concern for my future time in Korea. I, along with another soldier, Ernie Reynolds, were then transported to Camp Housie, 2nd Division Headquarters. It was here that we learned we were going to, and I quote, boom boom country, north of the Imjin. I to 3rd Brigade Headquarters and Ernie to A Company, 1st of the 23rd. I certainly started to wonder what I was in for. Just a few days later, November 2nd, 1966, Ernie lost his life during an ambush along the DMZ. There were 7 killed, 6 Americans and 1 Katyusha. There was one survivor, David Bybee, He had been hit with 48 pieces of grenade fragments and played dead as a North Korean soldier ripped his watch from his arm. His story of this attack led to Ernie Reynolds being awarded the Silver Star. Ernie, if I could speak to you in the afterlife, know that your death was not in vain. Your sacrifice helped keep the Republic of Korea free and allowed it to become one of the great nations in the world. I'd like to interject a small side note. 52 years later, in March 2018, at a small gathering of DMZ veterans held in Statesville, North Carolina, I was afforded the honor of presenting a replacement watch to David Bybee. For the most part, this ambush has been recognized as the beginning of the DMZ war. However, some suggest that the beginning is traced to October 5th, 1966, when Kim Il-sung, in a speech to the Korean Workers' Party, gave warning that the status quo since 1953 between North and South Korea was about to change. He fully believed that the people of South Korea wanted to shed themselves of the shackles imposed upon them by the government of South Korea. How wrong he was. I soon learned that duty on the DMZ was just as dangerous as that in Vietnam. After my return to civilian life and continuing to this day, when people ask me about my military duty, they usually assume that I had been in Vietnam. Upon learning that I was instead in Korea, they speak of how lucky I was. I have bitten my tongue so many times that I'm surprised that I can still talk. Some of the encounters from 1967 include, on May 22nd, the bombing of barracks in A Company, 1st of the 23rd. There were 2 killed and 17 wounded. I might add that this was the same company that lost the 7 soldiers killed in the ambush on November 2nd, 1966. On August 10th, 2 ambushes. The first, Blackie, a sentry dog, was killed, and Specialist 4, Jack Tyrell, the dog handler, was wounded. Blackie died saving the 8-man patrol. That morning, I saw Tyrell brought in by a helicopter to the 3rd Brigade Dispensary. The helicopter pad was just in front of the radio shack where I was preparing my radio equipment for a mission that day. It was a scene right out of MASH. The second ambush that day was of a 7th Division unit returning to their compound for lunch. 3 were killed outright with 17 wounded. A 4th would later die. I was nearby and heard the ambush. The call for help came in over my radio. The medics left to provide help, leaving my assistant and me alone to fend for ourselves. We chose to leave the open area that we were in and hide with our truck in heavy undergrowth a few hundred feet off the MSR. On August 28th, an ambush at Camp Liberty Bell, part of the JSA, C Company, 76 engineers, 4 killed, 26 wounded. The North Koreans set up 2 machine guns on a hill overlooking the compound and poured an estimated 3,000 rounds into the mess hall at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. To this day, one of the wounded still has a bullet in his thigh. To be sure, there were many more. A paragraph from the 3rd Brigade Headquarters Company yearbook from 1967 states, and I quote, "From May to September, combat with the North Koreans became a daily occurrence with the men of the 3rd Brigade. In this 5-month period, 3rd Brigade soldiers engaged infiltrators on 264 separate occasions with counter-intrusion fire. In addition, there were 47 firefights between North Koreans and 3rd Brigade soldiers, 3 minings in the 3rd Brigade sector, and 1 raid carried out by 10 North Koreans on a 3rd Brigade compound." End of quote. This was just the 3rd Brigade. There were other units north of the Imjin that had their share of combat. However, there were probably more combat-related deaths than combat-related. Accidents, friendly fire, suicides, and even murders. An example was a deuce and a half taking a patrol out for night duty on May 15, 1967. That truck went off the road rolled over and killed 5 soldiers, one of whom had been a high school classmate of a very close friend of mine. A month later, when home on leave, I had the occasion to speak with the mother of that lost soldier. He was just as dead as if he had been slain by North Korean forces, and the mother was just as distraught. I'm sure that most parents felt relief that their sons had been posted to Korea instead of Vietnam, and those parents must have been quite confused when learning of the death of a son in Korea. Various documents, especially government documents written about this time period, frequently understated events along the DMZ, as well as the number of killed in action and wounded in action. The United States government deliberately withheld this information from the American people over concern that there would be unrest over involvement on 2 fronts. Hence, recognition for the soldiers along the DMZ was denied. However, General Bonesteel, the commander of U.S. Forces Korea, knew this had to change, and he pushed for some basic recognition that was finally forthcoming on April 1st, 1968. It was on this date that hostile fire pay, an overseas service bar for 6 months of service, a combat patch to be worn on the right sleeve, as well as combat infantryman badge and combat medical badge were authorized, although with limitations not imposed on those in Vietnam. For those that served on the DMZ prior to April 1st of 1968, the recognition received was no different than what a soldier would have received in garrison at Fort Benning. To this day, lack of recognition has caused many DMZ veterans, including myself, a great deal of anguish, and for me is the single biggest burden that I carry from my time in the Army, more so than even the burdens from exposure to Agent Orange and diminished social skills caused from PTSD. Long ago, I stopped talking about my time on the DMZ because I got tired of being doubted and called a liar. We have been denied our rightful place on the American landscape, and as the last of the DMZ war veterans die, this war will be lost to history. If you want to see a monument for the DMZ veterans, you won't find it on American soil. Instead, you must travel to Camp Humphreys in South Korea. I know that the United States government will never let the truth be known, but there is satisfaction knowing that the Republic of Korea, as well as the KDVA, remembers and appreciates what we did. I know that I speak for all DMZ war veterans when I say, thank you, General Brooks, for covering our backs. Thank you. This slide right here is me standing on top of a North Korean tank with my company, my headquarters company of the 3rd Brigade in the background and North Korea beyond that. And that was just a day relaxing on the beach. So.
All righty. So really powerful, and I think very well stated, so thank you very much, Dave. So ladies and gentlemen, open the floor for any questions or comments for David. Yes.
Thanks for letting me ask another question. I really appreciate you bringing up the information that you're bringing up. It didn't end in 67 or 71, it continued.
Could you speak up, please?
I said what was happening, never ended. It's, still happening. It happened in the 80s. I just really appreciate the fact that you're bringing more of this to light. Myself included, I've been in the same scenario of people doubting my service and things of that nature. I've gone to events where folks have, outright just disrespected DMZ veterans. So I just want to say I just appreciate you bringing it to light and just keeping it real. Thank you.
Thank you. So David, when you went back to Korea in November last year, after so many decades, what were some impressions?
Well, I actually had the opportunity to go back on a 2nd Division function in 2015.
Oh.
So I would rather speak of that than just last year, simply because there had only been 6 years from my previous visit, and I knew what to expect. But in 2015, I was absolutely overwhelmed by what I saw. The only building in Seoul that I could recognize was a train station. Where you would leave, in 1966, leaving Seoul northbound, it was basically just dirt and gravel roads and rice fields and countryside. And today it's just, one large condominium complex after another, all the way to Munsan. You can't even separate the two cities anymore. Just amazing at the growth. I read about the miracle on Han, and to witness it firsthand was really overwhelming.
Great. Wonderful. All righty. Well, thank you very much, David. Really appreciate it.
Steve, if I might?
I'm sorry.
Just quickly, David, I want to thank you for telling your story today. You and I were on that 2015 trip.
Yes.
And it was extraordinary. There were men and soldiers who had not been in Korea for 30, 40, and 50 years. And as David said, you just absolutely take your breath away. And you could watch these veterans and their eyes would sort of glaze over a little bit, and 40 years would disappear. I mean, they were right there in the moment. It was an awesome event. So thanks for telling your story.
Thank you.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, for our last speaker before lunch, ROK-U.S. Chiofar. So I had an opportunity to do a Zoom with him and get to know him a little bit. I'll tell you, he's just a wonderful person. For all of our speakers, during lunch is purposely long. So you can try to speak with them, get together, maybe go out to lunch together, meet new friends. And Rocky is certainly somebody that you want to get to know. So thank you. Forward, and then if you for some reason need to go back, just hit back.
Okay. I'd like to start out by thanking our South Korean friends that are here. It's an honor to be in the same room with the members from South Korea. I enrolled in the Army on 3/3/69. I was 17 years old on February 27th, and I joined the Army on March 3rd. Took my basic training at Fort Gordon. AIT was at Fort Leonard, Missouri. And I was at Fort Lewis, Washington with orders to go to Vietnam. And they decided that a bunch of us were going to Korea instead. So off to Korea we went. I arrived in Korea 9/9/69. And I was assigned to B Company 76 engineers. And I do have friends from C Company, like David had mentioned, that were ambushed in the Chow Line. And we have a reunion every year and up in Lebanon, Tennessee, and that's how I became friends with those folks. And they've got some wild stories about that ambush. I'm not going to talk about it, but they did. My home base was at Camp Eiler, just on the backside of Kimpo Air Base. I was there for approximately 3 days and sent up to what we called Tent City. It was Camp Bravo, we called it Tent City. And it was just outside of the DMZ. It was just on the north side of Peju, I believe, in the 2nd Aviation Battalion. From there was about 30 of us that went TDY up into the DMZ, and we spent most of our time going from camp to camp to camp as we were building roads, paving the roads, and we paved a lot of them in the JSA area. Right up to the Bridge of No Return, where numerous times we came under assault along by the Bridge of No Return. And we, not like the previous engineers, when they were ambushed, they didn't have weapons. They smartened up, and we were carrying. And we spent a lot of time off the equipment and hitting the ditch and returning fire along the Bridge of No Return area. This picture here was from 1969 of one of the I think that was the south gate. Yeah. And I took that out of our yearbook. And when I returned to Korea with the revisit program in this past November, after 51 years, I was just in amazement of how much Seoul was built up compared to what this picture is right here. And because I never saw anything south of Seoul in my 18 months over there. I was always up in the DMZ, and we only went back to Camp Isler for like 2 months. We lived in tents, and they didn't believe that Camp Bravo existed. So that's why I've got this picture here, and C Company was actually with us at this point. It was B and C Company was at this, what we call Tent City, Camp Bravo. You will not find it on any military maps. It's non-existent. And you could see what we were living in for 18 months, except for a couple months when we went back to Camp Isler, was GP medium tents. That little round one in the middle was our captain's tent, Captain Owen C. Moore. He lives in Peachtree, Georgia. And the only building that wasn't a tent was the latrine right there in the front. Okay, and it was cold in this area. This is a better picture. There was 8 soldiers in each tent. And it was cold. We had pot-belly diesel stoves to keep us warm. So we were breathing in a lot of stuff we shouldn't have been breathing in. And you can see the guard tower in the background. And this is a picture that if you look right to the left of that guard tower, on the top of that hill is where we brought up a Connex, a 12 by 12 Connex for our communication tower. What we did is I actually made the road along that ridge with a bulldozer. Then we strapped that on with chains to the blade of the bulldozer and brought it up there. And that was our communication tower up there. And let me see what else I got here. It's just another, I must have went backwards. This is just a picture I took out of the yearbook. They called us a bunch of lifers, which I ended out re-enlisting. I spent 6 years in the Army. Let's see. I was 17 years old in this picture. These 290 earth scrapers was what we used a lot to get river rock to the rock crusher. And then also after that was crushed, we used these 290s to haul it to the asphalt plant, where the asphalt was made by a company. And when we went up to the DMZ, this is the approach to Libby Bridge, Freedom Bridge. Okay, old railroad bridge. Planks were put down so it could be used as a, regular bridge. And they weren't sure of, even though it was a railroad bridge, the weight capacity of those planks. And I went across with a 290 loaded with crushed rock, weighing a little over 200,000 pounds. And then after I got across safely, the rest of the convoy came with us. And I didn't do this is a picture I took from the 290 going across the bridge. And this is part of the crew up in the DMZ. That was mostly A company, 76 engineers, and paving the road. And this was getting closer and closer to December of 1969. And it was getting colder, so we only could go so far with the asphalt on temperature. Once it got too cold, we couldn't put it down no more. And that's when we actually did go back to Camp Isler for a couple of months. And then we returned back up to the DMZ to continue paving roads up in the DMZ. And this is when we went back to Camp Isler. The two of us, this was 3 days before we were leaving. Well, this is actually the day we were leaving Korea to return to the States. That's Sergeant Sipko. We were good friends. And the picture wasn't in order, but this is a picture from the revisit program of this year, of last year. And when we came to this area, the Bridge of No Return, it brought back some memories of what a bunch of us went through while we were there. I think I had a second picture of it. No, this is a picture of our group, the revisit group. And like Kevin had said earlier, we went over as strangers and we came back as family. We were all very tight, we talked, and it was a great time. I mean, it was just an unbelievable trip back after 51 years. And this was us all standing on the North Korea side of the table. And in the background, you can see there is a gentleman back there to make sure none of us tried to go out that door into North Korea. Not that we'd want to. But this was the group that went over, and it was just a fantastic time. And I need to thank the KDVA for that. Okay, well, I'll go back to the other one. No, okay. But while we were over there, we became very good friends. We had a very, very tight schedule on things we did, places we went, and the Korean ministry was just fantastic. We had younger guys that would follow us around to make sure that everything was good. And the funny part when we were over there was they took us shopping, and they said, don't go down any alleys. Well, don't tell me that, because I'm going down that alley. And my wife and I, Claire over here, we walked down the alley, and we're down there a little bit, and then we turned around to come back, and the young Korean's standing there going like this. He says, don't do that again. But it was a fantastic time, and I enjoyed my time in Korea. I was so glad to go back with the revisit program. My wife fell in love with the culture and the people of Korea, and we are returning on our own October 5th for a week. We're going back over, and we're gonna meet up with the two ladies that were our guides and have dinner with them. And we also made friends with a warrant officer from Camp Humphreys, and him and his wife live off base, and we're gonna get together with them and go out and do some sightseeing with them. I really don't have too much more to say.
Okay, well, thank you, Rocky. Thank you, sir, very much. Okay, take a couple of questions or comments for Rocky. Yes, sir, please. Just state your name, please, and then question. Thank you.
Michael Choi Kim from the Department of State. First, thank you. Michael Choi Kim from the Department of State. Rocky, we met yesterday, and I really want to thank the veterans, the DMZ veterans. I knew about the Access incident of the 70s, but I didn't know, in that 66 to 69 period, just so much live fire and carnage. Thank you for continuing to protect the ROK. So this is actually a question more like for everyone who spoke, especially from Colonel Maxwell on down. So I guess, what do Generation X and all the generations that follow really need to know about basically, the ongoing conflict, the DMZ, and not knowing just in their minds, but in their hearts? Because I think, I was over at U.S. Embassy Seoul from 2014 to 2016. And it's kind of, since, as you saw in Seoul, very modern, slick. It seems, it's so many, even for Americans, creature comforts. It's great, it's like being in Paris or Tokyo. So the threat, it seems out of mind. And so I guess that's one of the things I wonder. And of course, I saw, or I heard about the landmine incident when the Koreans got hurt, and then we really stepped up our game with the military exercises that year. So that was like when I kind of, in Koreans would say, 실감이 났다, 피부에 느낀다. I kind of felt it.
So
But then
can
it kind of went away.
Okay, so I'm
So
sorry.
that's just my comment.
Specifically,
Sorry.
what was the question?
So, I mean, basically, what the, like, Generation X and beyond, what do they really need to know so that they don't become complacent with the threat, but at the same time, not just totally vilifying North Korea?
Good, thank you.
I really don't really know what to say about that. But like they call it the forgotten war. And I think, like Deed was saying, that the generations nowadays need to understand what happened in Korea back then and not get so laid back about it because of the threats from North Korea. And I think they really need to understand the whole story of what's going on over there. And I will mention that, I forgot to mention that during my time up in the DMZ, we used a lot of Agent Orange. And I am 100% disabled from Agent Orange, for my heart, and carotid arteries and everything. It took me a long time to get it, because they said you weren't there. Okay, they said your unit was not in the DMZ. We were. I have pay records saying I was TDY to the 2nd Infantry Division, hazardous duty pay, and they kept denying my claim. And I ended up going to the board in Washington, D.C. for my final appeal, and they approved me. Okay, but there's a lot of soldiers that were over there exposed to Agent Orange that are still being denied to this day. All right, I was talking to a gentleman who's not here. He was with the Air Force, and he was up in the DMZ on occasions, and he's got some of the conditions from Agent Orange, and they said the Air Force was never in the DMZ. All right, they were. Okay, but that's stuff that the people now, the Generation X, or whatever you want to call them, need to understand about Korea. There's a lot of denial of what happened over there. And that time frame, like Dave was saying, is classified, it was talked about as the Second Korean War. And it didn't end in December '69, it went on further. All right? So it wasn't just a certain time frame and that was it. Hostilities stopped. They kept going. I mean, were they large firefights? No. But a lot of stuff that the people back home didn't understand, you don't know about it because Vietnam was on its high stages then. Everything was Vietnam, Vietnam, Vietnam. Nothing was brought up about Korea, what was going on in the DMZ area. It was pushed under the rug. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Okay,